So, welcome to the SkoCity podcast. I'm your host, God's Son, with Dewan at the end here, and I also have some very special guests today. And first of all, I want to thank you guys for coming out today. I really, really appreciate this. So, I have Carl to my right, and Carl, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm a psychologist here in town. I have a PhD in counseling psychology, and I've been practicing in Rockford area now, I think, for about 20 years. Started off in New York City, we moved here, and then I just continued teaching and practicing. So at this point, I'm sort of full-time private practice in the city.
Okay, great.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Williams. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I got my master's in social work with a concentration in mental health from U of I down in Champaign, Illinois. Upon graduating, I worked in Chicago area for a while. Then I moved back to Rockford, worked for Rosecrans for a couple years, and then started private practice. So I have been in practice since 2017, working with children, teens, adults, couples, families, really the whole different area of populations for a lot of different issues. And our practice has grown. So we offer both virtual and in-person services at Perryville Counseling Group.
Sounds good. Great. So I guess right off the bat, I mean, I'm just interested. I just want to know, are there a lot of programs floating around in the community that will make people aware of mental health counseling or therapy in the city of Rockford? Is there a lot of that going on right now?
My personal impression is that it is getting better. It's not where it should be, but it is getting better. I feel I'm seeing more and more people who a few years ago would have never shown up for therapy are actually showing up. I remember in grad school, we looked at a study that says that African American men in particular, they'll come to therapy once and then they won't show up. They won't follow up for a second. That has not been my experience.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So something has shifted. And I think more and more people who otherwise wouldn't have shown up are showing up and they're staying. They're going through the process. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely.
Is there a need for more? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think we're heading in the right direction. The conversation is happening, I think.
Right.
Okay.
And I think the conversation definitely starts at school. There's been a lot more psychoeducation going on in schools, obviously, given the climate of our society and the safety issue in schools physically. There's also a mental health issue, too. So one school in particular, Harlem High School, they do what's called a mental health day. And Kevin Polke, another local licensed clinical social worker that has his own practice, he leads that. And him and some of his staff and just other advocates in the area, they go and educate all of Harlem about mental health issues, signs, symptoms, warning signs, like what to look out for. Another way would be social media. You know, obviously nowadays TikTok, a lot of people are getting exposure to putting a label on some of their issues or behaviors like ADHD, anxiety. People are just getting the gist of it. And then word of mouth, my mom actually has been in the field for 35 years. And in the time that she's been in Rockford, she's been able to create a name for herself. And then together, her and I have created a name. And I think all the different people that we know, we're reaching two different generations. I'm in my 30s, she's in her 60s. We're able to reach two different populations to come in and see it's okay to talk.
So your mom's part of the baby boomers.
Yes.
And then you would be Generation Y.
I would, millennial.
Millennial.
Yes.
Okay,
Proud
yeah.
millennial.
So, yeah, so with education, there's been a big push for educational trauma-informed education. Mm-hmm. And I talked a little bit about it earlier about the social-emotional learning, that's been going on in the schools. And I think sometimes there's this resistance in society, especially in education, to look at trauma as being a reason why kids don't learn. I think there's in education you have the teachers here and you have the students here. They're both from different sides of the field, both different backgrounds, totally raised different. So one side looks at trauma and situations in life as, hey, you got everything you need to make it. I had the same thing. I made it. So whatever you're complaining about, you should be able to make it as well. And that's not the truth, though.
No.
There's a lot of undercurrent that's going on. For example, there was a student who would wear his hoodie all the time, And in school, that became a red flag because you got a hoodie on, you can be dangerous, right? And so they would tell this kid, take your hoodie off. And no, I'm not taking it off. Well, there was a reason why he was wearing that hoodie. Had they looked a little deeper, that hoodie was his sense of security. He had just lost someone very close to him.
Sure.
And that hoodie made that person, or made him feel that person was close to him. So it wasn't an issue I'm trying to threaten you or make you feel bad. It's just for my own,
Comfort,
my own, And so I think sometimes we run amok with that collision. So how do we normalize this conversation throughout the community, in our homes, with each other? How do we make the mental health conversation more easy to talk about, make it more, more ready out there, I would say?
Yeah. I think education, as you were implying, is an important first step. In the past, the word trauma was used everywhere. I think we're only now at the beginning stages of really understanding trauma and its long-lasting impact and how it shows up in different people, in children. We're only now beginning to kind of get to the bottom of some of this. And there are still people who are resistant. As you said, they will say, well, we went through hard times, we were poor, and we did this, and we did this. I think whenever I hear that, I am sensitive to the fact that the person who is saying it is telling me that they don't really understand trauma. Because trauma is not what is done to you. That's not where the wound is. Especially for children. The wound is this sense that I get that there's no one there for me. So we both can go through the same experience, but come out of it very, very differently, because I might be sitting there going through the same experience with you, and I have this sense inside of my body that there's no one there for me. It is that lack of support that triggers the brain to respond in a certain way. And once you have that brain response, you have that brain response, because one of the things we know about the human brain is a learning machine. And it's indiscriminate in its learning. So it can learn the good things and the bad things just as efficiently. And trauma fits right in there. And so to simply paint everyone who's struggling or everyone who's been through something with it, is saying, I don't understand what I'm doing. And unfortunately, sometimes we find these people in schools, sometimes we find them at the hospitals, sometimes we find them
in the church.
And that hurts more than ever, because here's a person who's already wounded and in need of care, and the person standing before them is saying, get over it.
Yeah, get over it.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Makes it worse, actually. So
very true. And just to piggyback off of that, I would agree that with trauma, one, we have to broaden the definition. It's not just, I went through a hurricane, or, I had a house fire. It doesn't always have to be something that is so grandiose that a person can't even imagine. Oh, that must have been so horrible. Sometimes it can be something as simple as I was laid off from my job and I've been struggling financially for a year. That's trauma. Yeah. Going through a breakup, that's trauma. Parents divorcing, that's trauma. So I think the whole get over it, that's definitely very true. That sentiment that people need to just, keep it pushing. That creates depression. That creates isolation. And that makes a person believe that my life is forever going to be this way. There's nothing anybody can do about it. So let me just shut down and hold it in and never talk about it. We have to unlearn that. Yeah. And I think that is how we open the door, break the conversation, destigmatize, because the more we close off, the more disconnected our society is, and then the crime rates go up. Everything catapults off of that.
Yes, so I think understanding what trauma really is and how it affects each of us differently will probably be the key to it. Because I could watch a guy get shot dead right in front of me and go home and eat like nothing ever happened. And I can call somebody on the phone that's clear out of town and say, hey, I just saw this person get shot right from me. And that person on the phone's traumatized by what I just told them. Not even experiencing or seeing what happened, but it's just the fact that somehow or another what I said clicked into something that they've been going through, that they went through. Yeah. So I think understanding what trauma really is and how it affects each of us differently and I'm going to say this as a man, as a black man in particular, I have to be aware of my blackness all the time. That's a trauma to me, because when I walk into a room when there's people in there and I see people clutching their purses, and this is still, believe it, it happens. I was walking out of I was walking into Barnes and Noble just the other day, and there was this lady coming out, and she looked at me and she automatically started clenching her purse, And I'm like, listen, lady, in my mind, I'm not thinking about you, but I see what you're doing. Sure. Those subtleties sometimes can trigger in us trauma, right?
Yeah.
And we have to understand what that is. So making this, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just one thing I want to kind of bring up here. There is a difference between stresses in life and trauma. Trauma is from the Greek word meaning a wound. A stressor is, it's kind of related to some of the things we'd encounter day to day. And these stresses, they build, because we sometimes interpret them as frustrations, meaning somebody or something is preventing me from meeting my goal or from experiencing my life in the way I want to. And so I can be traumatized by something and it's not showing just yet. You know what I mean? So, and at the same time, I think you were making that point. Something simple can happen and suddenly I can't function because the wound is individualized. And I think we don't miss that. So sometimes you see a whole family, a parent, both parents, 4 kids, 3 of the kids are on their way to the fast lane. And there's this one kid struggling and everybody's like, well, isn't he from the same family? What's going on? Because trauma is individualized. And sometimes I am traumatized, and I don't want to make excuses for people's behaviors, but sometimes I'm traumatized, or a person might be traumatized simply by not getting what they need. There's some research that was done at Harvard University many years ago, real quick. And there's a video of it somewhere in YouTube, I'm sure, that I used to show to my class. And this will take like a couple seconds. This mom is sitting with a little kid. The kid is about, 8, 9 months old. So the mom is interacting with the kid and the doctor is there. And the kid is having a blast, laughing and playing with mom. But on cue, the mother is supposed to turn away from the child. She's still in the room. And you look at that video, on cue, she turns away. And the child is trying to get her back. But in less than 5 seconds, you can see the child is already beginning to panic. This 9-month-old baby is already beginning to panic. So the child is doing the things that they were doing to get the mom back. The mom is not turning. In less than a minute, the child is so stressed out that she begins to bawl and twist and turn. That child needs that interaction with mom in order to continue to be safe. And sometimes something as simple as that can create such a wound that takes a lifetime to heal. So again, it's not the thing that happens. It's the interpretation to the individual person that makes the difference with the trauma. And many of us experience stresses all the time. You cut me off on the road. Hopefully I'm not talking on the phone with my kids. I might shoot a word off or 2 at you, you know what I mean? A stressor, or, you know what I mean? At the same time, that same stressor for another person can create a wound that will become the trauma.
Yeah. So I think back with me, when I said I have to be aware of my blackness every day, I know where that came from. Education. I'll just be honest with you. Because there was nothing for me in education. I was told in the 4th grade that Africa was a backwards country where they ate people. They had bones in their noses. They didn't bring anything to civilization. And I remember being told that I was an African American. So I kind of felt like, wow, I'm not going to have anything else to do with Africa ever again. I became learn self-hatred.
Absolutely.
And that began to happen with me. And so, wonderful story though, and I'll tell you guys another time, but I was walking home that same day, raining, it was outside, and I was running, and I looked on the ground, And there was a book called The Splendor That Was Africa, and was written by a lady by the name of Ricky Rosenthal. And up until the time, and that's what's happening to me like in 4th or 5th grade. But I was an adult when I realized that Ricky Rosenthal was a woman and not a man, first of all. But I wanted to reach out to the person and say, thank you for this book. The Splendor That Was Africa talked about the glorious kingdoms of Africa, Timbuktu, Songhai, Mali, Mansa Musa, you know what? And when I read that, I said, wait a minute. This guy has out-flat lied to me. But I still felt that unease when I was around certain people who bought into that theory, you know. And so subsequently, every black man became a thug or a potential criminal, you know. And we had to protect ourselves from those, you know. Back in the 1920s, there was this thing called fear of the black menace. And it was perpetrated in this country that black men were high off of cocaine and they were out raping white women. And so the police officers upped their caliber of hand weapons from 22 calibers to 44s, and it was to neutralize the threat. But that's all, but that trauma and those kind of things is why I feel like when the lady grabbed the purse, you know, I felt
that's internalized.
Yeah,
that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I felt some kind of way, you know, and I have to be aware of that every single day. But I want to make this conversation about this so normal that there's a healing process as well, too, because as I'm older, I know better now. I know that all black men are not criminals. As a matter of fact, everyone's not a criminal. It's not have to just be black people, you know. But the stigmatization that we received in this country has made me, it's traumatized me to an extent, even in the workplace. Sometimes there's this thing where, like, if there's an issue and I'm talking, and I may be loud, but I'm automatically interpreted as being angry, not passionate.
Aggressive.
Yeah. So those are slight traumas, you know, that if we normalize this conversation about mental health, maybe we can start, you know, turning that around and maybe start looking at healing in the community so we're no longer viewed as these aggressive people.
Right. I think there's healing when we openly discuss whether male or female microaggressions we experience in the workplace. I think that's a great example because it happens every day. And if it's brushed off and you're not validated, you're not going to talk about it again. You're going to shut down, keep your nose down, and kind of isolate. And I think that can be so lonely, and that can lead to very talented people quitting their jobs or not getting promoted, right? And they should be. But because of the workplace culture, for lack of a better term, they don't, because they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel safe. I opened up to Johnny or Susie, and they were like, oh, I didn't notice that. What are you talking about? They seemed nice. Even if it was something as innocent as a comment about your hair, you just never know how that's going to land with someone. And I think we have to be more cognizant of that and not so frivolously say things without really understanding the connotation. If somebody changes their hair, you can simply say, you look nice today. You don't have to comment on the texture and walk up to them and touch it. That's too much, you know? And then when somebody talks about it, you get invalidated, then you feel like, okay, well, that was stupid. But if it's a wound, like he said earlier, it's a wound. You don't get to tell me that it isn't.
Right. Yeah, and then, you know, and that plays throughout in every area of life we can think of, not just in the workplace, but even in the home sometimes, you know. There's a thing going on in Rockford now, it's called trauma-informed relationships. Because people bring baggage into relationships, you know, past traumas, you know, and those traumas get triggered, like you said, because of something that's already there, it's festered, it's built up, and then that trauma's triggered, and before you know it, we have domestic violence, and then it's out of control.
Yeah, and we know that childhood trauma in particular, the place that it shows up most often and most clearly is when we attempt to do adult relationships. So I can seem like a perfect person when I'm by myself.
Right.
But when you try to do an intimate relationship, whether it's with a lover or friends or at work or in community, that's where it's going to, because I begin to misread, I'm misreading some of the cues. You know what I mean? My nervous system is activated as I try to relate, and it's activated based on the history of suffering. But you don't know that.
Right.
And so some of your movements might be triggering for me.
Right.
Not because you're doing anything off, because of my own stuff.
Yeah. Right.
And we see that playing out all the time.
Yeah.
again, childhood trauma in particular shows up most often when we try to do adult personal relationships. So dating is fine. Try to get married to the person, and suddenly
The honeymoon's over.
where did they have
What happened?
Yeah, he was so nice.
Yeah.
Well, I
She
think
was so calm.
relationships are like a mirror. Whether it's friendship, dating, marriage, whatever it is, it's a mirror and it reflects back to you. The things I notice in you that irk me, I probably have some level of that myself because I wouldn't notice it if I didn't, right? But I think it's also important to know that a majority of us don't know how to respond to emotion dysregulation. We say, stop it. And I don't know, that we panic, right?
Yeah.
But when someone's dysregulated, I can almost guarantee you, and I've been in this field 10 years, telling them to stop is not effective. That's not going to work. Or calm down. Those are the worst things you can say. Instead, you have to say, what do you need? What's upsetting you right now? Do you need a minute? Like, should I step away? Did I say something that hurt you? Or just saying, you know what? I'm going to let you vent and get it out. I'm just going to be quiet. Trying to de-escalate a person, that's a skill. And it's a trained and learned skill for a reason. And I think more of us need to have exposure to that because it would cut down on a lot of the conflicts that happen in terms of like violence amongst families.
Yeah, and I think that's where we need to, and this is my second question, is the stigmatization that's been attached to mental health. And I think that people that are sometimes going through meltdowns or crises react and respond because in their mind, they feel like they're going to be judged about it anyway. Because when I grew up, I would see people would have, mental health issues and they were given certain terms, that boy's cuckoo in the head, or they're weird or they're strange, But that trauma, that mental health was never, ever dealt with. And I think as you move into adulthood, you have those traumas that were never dealt with. And now you're in a world you don't know how to deal with those traumas. But at the same time, there's something wrong with you. That something, but you just don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Because if you reach out, you're going to be called names.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the old movies about people with mental illness, you'll understand why. You know what I mean? Like they have these awful expressions. They are violent. They smell. So most people don't want to be associated with that image that is out there about someone with mental illness. I think that's where this idea of education is coming to bear, where there has to be conversations going on within families, in the community, in schools, about the need to take care of oneself, including one's mental health.
Now, let me ask you guys this question. You guys tell me how you feel about this, because sometimes I feel like intellectual disability has been attached to mental illness and people kind of use them interchangeably.
Right.
Is that the case? Or, I guess the question is, how do we step away from using those two interchangeably and putting those in their respective areas? Here's an ID, here's a mental illness. Let's not confuse the two.
Because they're not the same.
They're not.
Yeah.
Disability, that term could mean a whole lot of things. Is the person hearing impaired? Do they have language deficits, developmental issues? Me as a therapist, when I hear disability, I don't automatically think quadriplegic. Like, I don't think that. A disability, if you think about it, can be mental. Does this person have schizophrenia, or they have episodes that prevent them from being able to function or work in a traditional workplace setting? So I think ask. That's where we start asking specifics about.
So with the average lay person, though, who's not a trained professional, who's only seen and heard the stigmas attached to mental illness, because that's, I think, one of the things that I saw growing up is people with mental illnesses were often, and this is a very, very ugly word, and we don't use it anymore, but it was the word retardation. And people with mental illnesses were often termed as being retarded when they were not retarded at all.
Right.
But there was this, for some reason, that stigma got attached to it. Now all of a sudden, I've got all these traumas, but you're not going to look at me because I'm not retarded. I'm not going to tell you, that I'm going through. So we need to find a way to break those two back apart, put them in their respective categories. How would we go about doing something like that?
I would
collectively.
Say, I think in simple terms, it would be When I think of an emotional disability, something that is mental health related, anxiety, that just means that person, they struggle with managing their emotions. Whereas someone that has, an intellectual disability, maybe they're on the spectrum with like autism, I would say they learn differently. They need different things in order to process information. So kind of breaking it down. One's about emotion. One is about processing information and kind of making it different in that way, just to help people understand we're dealing with two different things. Both have to do with the brain, but one is more emotionally geared and the other is more with like information.
Yeah, one would be more cognitive or more physical, I guess.
Yes.
And mental health can also be a physical thing too, because there's self-harmers who actually, cut themselves in order to get past.
Self-soothe.
But I really think though that if we can get people to stop looking at mental health as someone being afflicted with some kind of intellectual disability, or and again, you're so right, because intellectually disabled people are no different than you and I. Well, I mean, they're different, but we're no better than they are, is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
They think and act and move differently than you and I do. They process things a little bit differently. But we got to find a way to let people know it's okay if you're going through this, Yeah. And I think I asked the question earlier, and you kind of answered the question too, when I talked about especially men being able to tell other men, that hey, my dad, growing up, he really beat me a lot, and sometimes I feel scared. Is it okay to have that conversation and not be looked as being weak or retarded,
Sure.
How do we move, people into those areas? And I think that's what's important, to get rid of that stigma. We have to say out flat, it's okay not to be okay.
Right.
That's what
Can I chime in?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, just to kind of just shift, the conversation just a little bit.
Okay.
I wanted to try to get some information out there to people who might not even understand, mental health in its entirety, even just by definition. So can each one of you just kind of speak to what your idea of mental health is for people, so where they might can, just gain some perspective on what they could possibly be dealing with. I think that's a big part of it, is people don't even understand the broader term of what mental health is.
That's a good question, actually.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that, and as you were talking, in terms of maybe a sense of self as a thriving being. Meaning that you have a sense of purpose, you have skills to manage life, because life, we all know around this table that some days are good, some days are not great. We have those things to deal with. So you have enough resilience to cope, to bounce back, to manage yourself and the relationships that are important to you. When I think of mental health, I think of that kind of holistic approach to living in a world that is unpredictable oftentimes. But I have the emotional stability, I have the skills, I have the resilience, I have what I need to thrive in spite of.
Okay.
I would agree. A lot of what he said, it is a holistic approach, because mental health, it's everything that creates, makes up your life like a puzzle. This piece is work, this piece is home and family, this piece is my personal emotions and personal challenges or struggles. And it's really about mental health is figuring out, what do I need to navigate this particular season in my life? Yeah. And a lot of times, to figure that out, we don't necessarily do that by ourselves. We ask someone who's already been there before, maybe someone older than us, maybe someone who from a different walk of life. I think mental health means being open enough to learn from someone else on how to deal with what's going on in your life, because we all learn from each other. I think we're all each other's teachers, and even if we're not cognizant or aware that we are living, breathing mental health, we are. Because when we sit down and have a conversation as simple as, how are you? Boom, that opens the can of worms. And then you're like, wow, this person's going through a lot more than what meets the eye. So I think that's what mental health is.
Yeah, and I think we have to be humble about this. because the human brain is not as smart as you think. It's actually quite dumb.
Right.
And so the human with his or her consciousness has to be a little smarter than his brain in the sense that, again, I started off by saying that the brain is a learning machine and it's indiscriminate in what it learns. So there are some real silly things that are floating around and the brain will pick up on that. For example, if I spend all of my days I'm thinking of something dumb that people do all the time. Just watching shows with guys just doing dumb stuff. I don't read. I don't interact in any constructive way. I don't do anything to push myself toward emotional health. I am therefore coming into the world with limited social skills. And when you meet me in school and you bump me in the hallway because you're rushing to get to class and didn't see me coming around the corner, and you say, oh, my bad, I'm still going to have a lot of feelings about you bumping me because I don't have the social skills to like, oh, we're good. I'm like, is he disrespecting me? Did he just bump into me? He didn't bump into anybody else. I'm going through all this because I don't have the skills.
So the second part, to that is, can you kind of tie it into how what you just said, bridging that with how that can directly allow people to tap into that violence?
So beginning early, and I've always felt that as a society, we should be capturing children from the time they're born at the hospital, making sure they're well-resourced for life. And we will save in the tail end if we invest in these early days. We don't do that. But children learn right away just by playing. The world is safe. Look at mommy is playing with me. We're making eye contact. Children they're learning all of that. But when we have people who are growing up without that kind of interaction, we see the deficit in social skills. So in answer to your question, my suggestion would be that we start early introducing this kind of social interaction, this kind of play within the homes that will save us in the long run, because that's what's missing. Most of our children are growing up watching TV, growing up playing with things. They have early phones.
Tablet kids.
Right.
Yep.
What they're not getting is eye contact and smiles and the little nonsense stuff that people used to do, little ju. They seem goofy now, but they enhance social learning. And there's an absence of that. You combine that with the fact that nobody in America is feeling safe today. Are we surprised that our kids are fighting in school in the way that they're fighting? It's not just coming up in a vacuum. Nobody in America feels safe. You go to everywhere you go, people are anxious.
It's a lack of nurturing. And I think nurturing starts early, like what you said. Children don't know how to emotionally regulate. We teach them. Right. We are their emotional regulators. So if I come in the room and my child is screaming and I scream back, we're going to keep screaming. Yeah. If I come in and I meet their anger with calm, that's naturally going to de-escalate the child because they're like, well, I'm the only one in the room freaking out. I guess I can calm down. I'm safe. Right? So we have to learn how to respond appropriately to children so that later on down the line, they're not incarcerated. Because I think aggression is directly from lack of nurturing, lack of emotional validation, lack of building, safety, building someone up. You're smart, you're capable, you're powerful, you're kind, I love you, you mean something to me. If you've never heard any of that, you're going to be a pretty angry person.
Yeah, and in light of what you're saying, there's some research done by some researcher named Phinny, Phinny. And she noted that for African Americans in particular, there are some cultural stages that you have to go through. She talks about this initial stage where we're all ignorant about our ethnic identity, I suppose. And in that state, if children grow up ignorant in that state and they go through that, then they tend to be more at risk for depression, low self-esteem, low self-worth, aggression, all these negative things. On the other hand, the children and the people who push themselves to be informed, to understand, just as you did with that book, understand like where they're coming from, their own ethnic identity, and they've become more comfortable with it, they tend to have better self-worth, increased sense of purpose, calmer in the world. A lot of good things come just by understanding who am I in the world. When you were talking about your learning in school, it reminded me of something that I read that I'll never forget, because I think it's the fundamental truth of America that until we own this, we're gonna keep having a lot of the sort of racial tension that's going on. We have to own this one thing, and that is schools are the first places where propaganda is taught. And the most dangerous lie that's taught in school is that somehow we're all different, that we're not all humans, that we have different values. And the way that is taught is that it's one group that created everything, produced everything, discovered everything. Everything that is noble and good is done by one group, and the rest are just tagging along.
We're here to entertain, right? We got to entertain you with music and sports, and we're more than that.
When the most fundamental truth is that we're just all humans.
With talents.
Oh,
Exactly.
I agree.
And if we start teaching that early in school, I believe it will be transformative.
I agree. So the socialization of our individuals, and I think that kind of can go back to your question. How would you address that need that's going out into the community right now?
Yeah.
And I think the biggest perpetrator of that, I'm saying the cause of the mental health or illnesses that we experience, first of all, it's collective trauma. First of all, we got to understand that our trauma is collective. But I think it's the socialization process, what we learn, and how we learn to interact with each other, you know. And so typically I've been told, and I haven't done the research, but I've been told that most African-American males by 7th grade, they change from socialization to survival mode. So parents have a particular fear, you know. Johnny's in school, you know, and Johnny may be having great grades, and the teacher may come along and say, you know, Johnny's a great student. The mom may automatically begin to, oh my God, Johnny's being targeted now. Now I've got to watch because they're going to try to flip Johnny. So let me, you know, so it's that socialization, is that process that we undergo, almost like we're being brainwashed. You have to unlearn, I think, is what we have to do in order to really begin. And that's why I did the podcast. It was called The Naked Lunch Club. I said, because there's a historical aspect to our trauma. We have to uncover that. And that started with education.
Right.
You know, so you're right. We have to uncover that. And so I think that if we're going to do a mass healing, I guess if you want to call it a mass recovery, the first thing I think we have to do is, let's see if we can redirect socialization back to a healthy, you are somebody. You are just as important as everybody else.
And that starts at home. It really does. I mean, yes, school is a huge piece of it because your child spends 8-9 hours of their day there. So in some cases, they're at school more than they are at home, depending upon the home life situation. Single parent homes, co-parenting, all that stuff. But there is a book, The Body Keeps Score. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. It's by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, and he's done a lot of research on trauma and talks about like our neurodivergent brains and how our brains and our nervous system, it's like a sponge. It soaks up so much. And then you go to school and you're having all these behaviors and your teacher's looking at you like, whoa, where is this coming from? But if that's all you've seen, that's all you know, you know, and then you're automatically labeled as the bad kid, the troubled kid. And in reality, you're just repeating what you've seen. You don't actually mean any harm. You don't even really understand why you're acting out and talking out of turn, but you're doing it because that's what's been shown at home. When mom and dad argue and fight, they throw things. So I throw things when I'm upset. So I think the body keeping score, it's like you physically feel, like if you talk to a child that's angry, if you sit and talk with them long enough, they'll probably start to cry. Because underneath anger, as we all know, anger is a secondary emotion. So underneath anger is shame, embarrassment, fear, sadness, insecurity, all these other feelings that if you kind of don't get so scared of the exterior of the threat, you're threatening me, I want to get away from this child. Go close, draw closer to them. They're actually not a threat. They're crying out for help. It just looks intimidating. Right. So I think kind of that's part of this conversation too, is everything is not what it looks. Everything is not what it appears. There's something underneath there.
Yeah. So I definitely agree the body does definitely. And I'm not going to say the body, I'm going to say your cognitive processes keep score. Because because there is an environmental transmission of trauma. I could be in the home and see mom fight dad, that's environmental. And so that's going to traumatize. But then I think there's this thing within us that's, and I'm going to use the term, and I don't know if a lot of people are even familiar with it, but it's epigenetical transmission of trauma. And those are biological curses that develop within us over a period of time.
PTSD.
Yeah.
Complex PTSD.
Well, it becomes a part of who we are, our anatomy, our biology, where I'm fine, right? And I like I talked about before I think you were here, but I came out of a home where, hey, I had a mom, I had a dad, we had everything. But all of a sudden, I'm very, very violent. I'm very, very angry. I have this deep-seated, and you said anger is a secondary emotion, because underneath that anger, there's this fear that I have, that somehow or another, I'm not going to make it home today. I have this fear, if I get stopped by the police, that'll be my last stop. I have this deep-seated fear that's there. Where did it come from, though? Because I never saw it, but all of a sudden it's there. So I think that's something we have to uncover and begin to address.
And acknowledge.
Yeah,
And it's not a knock to I talk to a lot of parents because I work with children and families and adults, so a mix of all populations. And a lot of times when we bring that up, they feel defensive. Yeah. Right? Because it's like, well, you're saying I'm a bad parent. You're saying I basically created a monster. My child was born in this world with PTSD. Is that what you're saying? It's like, I'm not saying you specifically caused this, but there's a whole generation behind you that didn't talk. Can we just be 100? Nobody talked. So here we are. So what your son or daughter is currently going through indirectly and directly has to do with you, because your mom, your dad, their mom, their dad, and the list goes on, had all these issues going on and nobody ever talked about it, because what happens at home stays at home. We've all heard that. And I think the whole being seen and not heard, at one point your parent was a child. They were told to be seen and not heard. So now they're projecting that onto you. And they don't even realize that I am creating and fueling generational trauma without even knowing it. And it's not something to be defensive about. I'm not attacking you. I often have to use that languaging with clients, especially minorities, because it feels personal. Yeah. It feels very personal. You're telling me I caused these problems, when I'm a good mom, I feed them, I buy them everything they want. Okay, that's all stuff and things. Sure, they have the basic needs met, but emotionally, do you connect with them? Tell me 3 of the names of their best friends at school. Who's their favorite teacher? What class are they struggling in the most? Oh, well, I don't talk about all that. That's connection. That's what's missing. Kids can have all the things in the world, clothes, food, all of that, but they need to know they're understood. And an adult too, at one point you were a child and you needed to know you were understood. So the lack of needs, it just goes on. And the parent a lot of times is like, wow, what you're telling me, I never had that. Maybe I can learn to give that to my child.
That's the beauty about it. We can relearn.
Yes.
But we've got to get the message out. That, it's okay not to be okay, but here, let's learn how to be okay. And I think sometimes we can talk about it all day long, but then that goes right back to that. When I grew up, I don't know if it's like that now. I don't know if people look at mental health now as a bad thing, but when I grew up, it was a bad thing.
To a degree, they still do.
I don't know if they, yeah. But so if we can ever get past that, I think, did you have another question, or are you good?
No, I just think I just appreciate the healthy conversation. I think that, I say we just because collectively, I don't know if you got kids, but I do. And I mean, I try to take a sense of a heightened awareness, you know, when I'm dealing with my children personally, because, I mean, I think this conversation been at the forefront, and I think as parents, I mean, the best thing we could do is, like, you pretty much, guys just tapped into everything at home. I think is the most crucial aspect of it right now.
I think so. That's where
like
we
he
build
said, you know,
resilience.
even raising them from, you know, tiny infants. You know, I just think that I don't know, man. I'm glad we had this conversation.
Yeah, and
It's
I like.
because parents, we need to be more open to the fact that our actions, our behaviors, the way we respond, our kids are going to be directly affected by all avenues.
And it's okay to accept help. And half the time, resources that I teach about every day that are in the community or within my practice at Perryville Counseling, like, those are things you wouldn't know otherwise. So let's have the conversation. Me sharing a piece of knowledge with you, hopefully, should not feel like a threat. That is not at all condemning you as a parent or your skills. But at the end of the day, myself included, as the expert, we all have room to learn. I'm still learning.
Right.
You know,
Definitely.
me, the professional, I'm still learning things. So that should show any person on the street, if I'm still learning, you're still learning. Like, it's okay to not know it all. It really is.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned those early years, because Freud, whether we accept him today or not, Freud talks about the first 6 years of a child's life being determinative. Like after the first 6 years of your life, most of who you're going to become is determined there. I think there is something to that, and I think for me, what we have to do in order to kind of stem some of the trauma flow is to start early. I mean, because kids, people don't realize, when they are born, the brain is already open for relationship and learning.
I think also people need to understand the benefits of seeking mental wellness as well too. It's not a sentence where you are being judged. It's not a sentence where it's saying you're not okay, you're weird, you need to be fixed, because there's some definite benefits to having a healthy mental wellness.
Can I step out of
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a benefit to mental wholeness, and I think if we explore that as well, you know, not just, you know, hey, here's what made you mentally ill, and here's how you're going to fix it.
Right.
But let me tell you what's going to happen once it's fixed. The joy in life you're going to receive.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And it takes maintenance too. And I always preface that because I provide outpatient counseling. So 1 or 2 sessions, your life isn't going to miraculously change, but we can get the ball rolling. And I think the average person is in counseling from anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, and sometimes longer. I mean, I have clients that they joke with me. They're like, you're never getting rid of me. You're going to have me forever. And some I've had for like 6 years. Yeah. And at this point, we only meet once a month because they just like coming and they like filling me in on how well they're doing. Every session does not need to be a crisis.
Right.
You don't just come to schedule with me because, oh my gosh, my life is falling apart. People come to me about everyday issues like, okay, my husband never cleans up after himself, or, you know, my kids are struggling in school, or just very basic things. It does not always have to be crisis related to count to need outpatient therapy. I want to preface that just because a lot of times, like, well, nothing's really wrong. I just got regular everyday people issues. I'm like, those regular everyday issues are my specialty. You know, I can help you with that. So
we need to open that door up, you know, so people will feel comfortable talking about those everyday
and not just wait till things are
Until
like
it
out of
blows up.
control. Yes.
Oftentimes, aren't the small everyday things usually rooted in something deeper anyway?
Yes.
So I think you just
100%.
try to help them to understand why that small thing is able to, you know, go 0 to 100 or, you know, ruin their day even.
That is true. Yeah, that is true. Because they have sometimes I'll ask clients, wow, you have a really strong response to the dishes not being done. Why is that?
Yeah.
And there's usually a deeper meaning there of something they haven't spoken on that they're repressing. And then and then their spouse thinks like, wow, you really are triggered over some dishes.
Yeah.
You're crazy.
Overreacting,
But it's really not about the dishes. Yeah. It's about, I don't feel that we're a team. I don't feel like I can count on you. When I'm sick or I'm not able to take care of something, it's not taken care of. You don't pick me up when I'm down.
Yeah. So the whole village, the whole community can come together when mental wellness is explored and put out there as normalcy. It's okay to be okay as well as it's okay not to be okay, but it's okay to be okay. I'm okay, but I still can tell you, man, I stomped my foot on the stairs this morning and I felt like swearing, you know? And there may be a deeper issue behind that that I may not recognize, but by me sharing that with you, you can give insight, you know, and then I also get that feeling of connectivity that I'm not alone, that I am being supported. And I think that is something that we can definitely, begin to push in a mass way that, hey, you're not alone. There's someone here for. So we got about 9 minutes left, and I'm going to ask the big question, the ultimate question, okay? Because I don't even know how to start this. So there was a guy by the name of David Walker. I don't know if you ever heard of David Walker, but if you have never, get a chance to pull out David Walker's Appeal. Okay. David Walker's Appeal is done in, I think, 4 areas, and it's religion, politics, socialization, and I think it's one I can't remember what it was. But if you read David Walker's Appeal, he uses a term over and over that Africans or African Americans are the most pitiful people that has ever walked the face of the earth, for example. They're the most tortured, the most, I'm not using the same words David Walker uses, I can't remember the words exactly, but he talked about them being, oh my God, I can't really form it the way I want to, but ultimately though, what he was saying is that he was talking about their mental illnesses, what he was expressing in his David Walker's Appeal. You have to kind of like read in there and see that when he says these words, they're miserable, they're tortured, those words. If you look at the word miserable, for example, that's indicative of mental health, a mental state of being, So Walker talks about that. But now Walker's Appeal was written long before, at least 50 years before this country even termed, according to the term sociologists, for example. Psychology at that time was relegated to phrenology and hypnotism, and that was it, and that was coming out of Europe at the time. In this country, it was, you were determined, your mental state was determined by the shape of your head, for example, the color of your skin, But Walker was doing this serious research, and he was walking throughout the country, and he was looking at slaves' firsthand experience, and he began to write about it. His work was never, ever accepted or never even included into academia to this very day. But I think if we look at David Walker's Appeal, we get a foundation for the trauma that most African Americans experience, which leads me to my ultimate question. Do you feel that African Americans are the most underserved population when it comes to addressing mental health needs?
One of. And I may get heat for this, but it's partially self-inflicted. I think when you were just speaking now, what popped into my head was the crabs in a barrel mentality. And if we would be brave enough, and I use that word because it kind of goes with the point I'm trying to make. If we're brave enough to empower each other, I think some of these stigmas could be more easily dismantled. Because a lot of times I'm struggling and I don't necessarily want to see you do better than me, And I think sometimes when a Black person is trying to get ahead or they are trying to educate themselves, they're labeled as you think you're better than me. You are, for lack of a better term, part of the white man's world now. You're one of them. And in reality, it's like, no, I'm climbing the step and I want to bring you with me. I'm not necessarily leaving you behind. We can go together and learn more and live better and do better and be exposed to new ideas without feeling threatened by it or feeling inferior when another person of color happens to have more education in a specific topic like mental health than I do. So I think that we're underserved, yes, society in the way, a lot of reasons, the system is set up in some ways to fail us. But I also think we don't do ourselves any favors with the negative talk, the glorification of the wrong stuff, when it comes to, oh, this is, music and rapping and have a career as an influencer. And those things aren't bad, but those aren't the only paths. And I think we have to kind of cultivate the young minds that are scholars. Like, this kid could do more than be a professional basketball player. Perhaps they could be a scientist. They could be a lawyer. Let's cultivate that. That doesn't make them like a threat.
Right.
So I think we're underserved for a lot of reasons, and we don't have time to get into it today, but I do think part of it is our mentality doesn't help us get ahead at times.
I do have a little more.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I do have a little more sympathy here, because I feel if you take a damaged child and then fast forward 25 years later, you have a damaged adult. So if you have a damaged adult, you can get that damage coming through. And I feel that because African Americans have been in a state in this country where they've suffered more, then the impact of that will be long lasting. I think the miracle is that we have survived and we have done so well. I think sometimes when it comes to conversations about African Americans, what is highlighted really is the area where our people are struggling the most. So we don't go to college campuses and interview young African American scientists trying to become. We go to the block and we find the most dramatic looking person and we put that person up and use that as a representation. Well, why continue to invest in these people when this is the best you've gotten after years of investment? So there is a trick there. Because I have been in school a long time, and I have seen not enough, but enough of our people absolutely blowing it away. Young thinkers, brilliant minds, people trying to collaborate, doing amazing things. They are not on TV.
Nope.
And this is a really visual society. So if all you're putting up is just these people, and then they hold up people like Clarence Thomas and these weird people as models of, nobody wants, but I don't know any African American person who wants to be like Clarence Thomas. There might be a few, but the mothers of our community, we don't see them out there making do with straws when they need rope and creating miracles all the time. So I am a little bit more sympathetic.
And and I will say this too. And I think we need to explore this in detail. Because when we talk about the crab barrel mentality, what we fail to realize, crabs were never designed to be put in a barrel.
That was my point.
When you stick them in there, they react. And that's why they pull each other down.
Yep.
That's survival mode.
Yep.
That's not
Trauma.
that's not I hate
response.
you, I don't want to see you do better than me. So once we understand that crabs in a barrel are living contrary to their design, and when you do that, you're going to have the traumas. And I don't think that's been understood. But I think we're looking at it and we're blaming the victim for the victimization.
Yeah. That was where I was going with this. So my takeaway is, and this is where I think solution, we have to educate our people to start early. Start touching your little babies. Start creating routines, because routines early creates a sense of predictability. Predictability creates a sense of a safe world. So start early. Remove all the television and the noise and all that stuff. Just play with them when you have
PlayStations and
Yeah,
the
just-
TikToks. Let's get rid of that stuff.
Yeah, just forget Facebook. Just let
Connect.
Yeah.
Connect. That's what you're talking about. There's
Just
power
be
in
present.
connection.
Yeah, you don't
Yes.
need a lot of money.
Yeah.
You have a nice evening with your kids, and you know what I mean. You're on the ground. They making just create those kinds of human experience as early as possible. You know, I just, you ask about children. I have 4 kids that I raised here in Radford. They all went to public schools. And I will take any one of them randomly with my eyes closed and put them up against any kid from any private school in this city, and they will nail it. Why? We made the time for them. We were playing, we were reading. We had Saturday evenings when we did nothing but just hung out with the kids. We had food on the table. We listened to their stories all evening. That's
Family.
where we were. Yeah.
Connections. Yeah, I agree.
That's where we were. You know what I mean? So it can be done. Our children are no different from anybody else's. They can learn. They can be brilliant. They don't have to be fighting as they do in Auburn. We just have to take the time to go back and do the work. Not easy work, but work that can be done. And it's joyful work in the end.
Yes, I agree. Guys, listen, I've had a great time. The time is up, though, but you guys have been awesome. I really appreciate you guys coming to the show. And I look forward to maybe even having you guys come back again and we can get a little more deeper into this.
Yeah.
I love that.
But for now,
we definitely need a round 2. I mean, I sat back and, I mean, I was just like the audience would be, probably just try to suck it all in.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we do enough of giving it out on a platform where people can just,
that open platform.
just have the free flowing information.
A meeting
it's-
of the minds.
You take what you
Yeah.
want to take from it and what apply to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, guys. So listen, thank you once again for listening to SkoCity Podcast with God's Son. That's me. Stay low, lay low. I'm just trying to stay out of the way until next time.